Hello and welcome to this lesson on our Python programming series. Today we are going to look at the Python syntax and semantics. By the end of this video lesson, you will have a solid understanding of how to write syntactically correct Python code and the meaning behind your code structure. So let's get started. So over here, as you can see, we have a print statement. This print statement is going to print hello world, right? But notice over here the use of the parenthesis and the quotation marks that are being used over here. So if you just make the syntax incorrect, so it is going to cause you an error and your code is not going to run. And if we just run this code, we know the output is going to be hello world. In the same way, let's take another example where we will see how to use the variables and the data types. So over here in this example, you can see we have apple price, which actually contains the cost of a single apple, which is actually a float. And you can also see as we have the Python compiler installed, so it detects that the variable is apple price and it has a value of float. In the same way, you can see that we have apple count, which has an integer value, which is 10. In the same way, the total cost is actually going to contain the total cost, which will be the apple price multiplied by the apple count. So you can see over here that the answer is going to be float. And if we simply run this statement, so we know that the output is going to be 15. So over here, we saw that the Python automatically understands that the apple price is a float and the apple count is an integer. In the same way, let's take another example. So over here, what we are seeing is a control structure, and we are seeing over here the use of if and else statement. So over here, notice the use of the indentation that we are using in this control statement. Don't worry for now if you do not understand the statements. We are only focusing on the syntax as of now, and we will be covering each and every depth detail of control structures and everything in our upcoming video lessons. So over here, if you notice, we have the temperature variable that contains the integer value, which is 20 degrees Celsius as of now. And the statement actually checks if the temperature value lies within one of the range. So if it lies within one of the range, it is going to tell whether or not to wear the t-shirt based on the temperature value. So if we just run this code, we will see the output is going to be bring a sweater because our temperature value is 20. And you can see over here that it neither falls in the first statement nor in the second one, but it falls in the third one. So over here, you notice after the if statement, the condition provided, and notice the use of the colons over here. Then we have the indentation making the Python compiler know that, okay, there is going to be a condition that needs to be executed if the condition falls within this state. And then after that, notice how we are using the else if statement, provided it comes just below the if statement, and then the use of the colon, and then after that again an indentation which tells the Python compiler that, okay, if the condition falls within this state, then this particular line of code needs to be executed, and in the same way for the else statement as well, right? So let's move on to our next statement. So over here we are using a for loop which actually calculates the total savings over 5 years by adding $100 each month. So you can see over here for 60, for the range in 60, which is actually equivalent to 5 years, it is actually adding the value of 100, and what it calculates is that it will calculate the total savings that a person had in 5 years. So if you just run this code, you will see that you get the output as 6,000, right? So notice over here we have this for loop statement, and then after that using the colon over here, and then after that giving an indentation which tells the Python compiler that if the for loop needs to be executed, what are the Python statements that needs to be executed for this much intervals, right? After it performs its calculation, then ending the for loop, it comes into the print statement, and then it prints the total saving for the 5 years. Now let's also see how you can actually define a function. So over here you can see that the function is defined as calculate area, and it takes the two inputs, the two parameters, and as you can see over here it ends with a colon. Now what it is going to return is the product of length and width. So you can see over here that what we are telling is to return product of these two variables. Now whenever someone wants to calculate area, they are simply going to use the function and input the two values inside the parenthesis. Once the function is called and the calculation is performed, that output is going to be stored in a variable which we have named as area, and it is going to print that output. So notice the syntax over here that we are using the define statement, ending the define statement, using the return statement, and then how we are declaring a variable to store the output of this function, and then how we are printing it. So each and every situation in the Python code has its own syntax. And how you are going to learn it, you are going to learn it by practice. And that's the only way, right? So if we just print the output for this code, you will see that the output comes out to be 15, which is the product of 5 and 3. Now let's take an example of a error handling. So I have a code over here which tells that we are going to define a function with the name as greeting, but you see we haven't ended this statement, right? So it is giving us an error over here, and this is a syntax error, by the way. So if I just put a colon over here, so you see that syntax error just goes away. So this is really important when you are coding in Python, that you do not perform any syntax errors. Otherwise, your code is not going to be executed. Now let's see how does a semantic error looks like. So in this case over here, you can see that we have a code which stores num. And by the way, you can see over here when we hover the cursor over here, it says that the variable num is actually storing a string. It's not a value, because when we store a value, and we will look at it in depth as well in our future sessions. So you see it comes like this, right? But as of now, we have declared it within the quotation marks, which means that it is a string. And when you try to execute this code, it is going to give you an error, because this is a semantic error, because the meaning does not make any sense. So if you just run this code, you see you get an error telling that you cannot concatenate a string to an integer. So with this, I hope you have got an understanding of how the Python syntax looks like. Remember, the syntax is all about the structure of your code, while semantics is about the meaning behind it. Now, the only way you can go through it is practice writing your own code to get comfortable with these concepts. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Python tutorials.